bit after 6, and welcome to our meeting for this evening. I think we'll start off with introductions, and we'll start with our city attorney.
Good evening, Patrick Baker, City Attorney.
Good evening, Victoria Watlington, District 3.
Tara Bakari, District 6.
Ed Driggs, District 7.
Malcolm Graham, District 2.
Marcus Jones, City Manager.
By Lyles, Mayor.
Good evening, Luana Mayfield, Council at Large.
Renee Johnson, District 4.
Good evening, James Mitchell at large.
Good evening, Marjorie Molina, District 5.
Dimple Ajmira at large. Billy Tons, Deputy City Clerk.
All right. With that, I thought we would open this meeting in the engagement that we had for our announcement on committees, that we said that we wanted to have, as a council as a whole, more opportunity for engagement, discussion, working on the ideas around policy, and making sure that we were all staying together and then could identify the most important issues that we had. And I know that committees are critical to the work that we're doing as a collective. And I had 3 objectives that were outlined in our memo. One, that there would be more time for discussion. There would be additional staff support, and that we would work on increasing our cross-discipline collaboration among the committees. As we take all of our city priorities and create that level of collaboration by sharing the policy discussions with policy in a horizontal way. I think I stole that from Mr. Bakari. So as we begin discussion tonight from today's committee work, I would like to ask that all of our committee chairs speak to these 2 questions, or at least speak to these 2 questions. And the first question that I suggest is that, what is the most relevant issue discussed in your committee, and what was the outcome? And then the second question was, how could the council as a whole build on the work that you've just discussed? I thought it might be good to start with our Housing, Safety, and Community Committee, since it was the first and the last one, and actually the time closest to this one. And this is really an attempt to make sure everyone engages. The Mayor Pro Tem attended 4 committee meetings today. So I've asked him to make sure that he has an opportunity, as he sees those opportunities that we have for collaboration, to recognize those. But I'd like to start with Ms. Watlington.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As you mentioned, the Housing, Safety, and Community Committee met today under our new name and under our new charge. We welcomed new members, Vice Chair Mayfield, Council members Johnson, Molina, and Bakari, in addition to myself. And we talked 2 major policy items today. The first one being neighborhood tree health. So we talked about how are we going to undergird, if you will, our tree canopy, our action plan associated with that, as well as the largest item that we spent time on today, our development fees, and what potential tools can we provide developers, particularly affordable housing developers, in order to enable more affordable housing. Part of that discussion included a bit of a review over what is allowed and what is not from a legal standpoint. We learned today that while we cannot offer fee waivers, we can offer reimbursement. However, it cannot come out of the utility funds. So that has some impact to our taxpayers, and we want to make sure that as we are trying to encourage affordable housing, we're also making sure that, in Mayor Pro Tem's words, we're not robbing Peter to pay Paul, and that our taxpayers are getting the most bang for their buck. One other item that I wanted to mention in response to that conversation is Councilmember Bakari brought up a desire to see a broader view. As we think about policy specifically, we were encouraged to see some of the opportunities that were mentioned, and I'll just give a quick rundown of a couple that stuck out. Potential waiver of new street requirements, build to zoning district standards of next greater intensity, allowances for heritage tree mitigation, and sidewalk cost reimbursement. Those were a few of the items that were mentioned that would follow along the lines of what has already been baked into the UDO. These would apply to certain types of units that have to meet a certain AMI mix and a longer 30-year affordability term, whether that is through a deed restriction for sale units or certainly a affordability term as it relates to rental units. But like I said, Councilmember Bakari mentioned, and I think many of us concurred, that we really want to see, before we move forward with these isolated policies, if you will, how that impacts the broader affordability mix and what that looks like as impacts to developers and also to the budget overall with the city. So we are looking forward to seeing a little bit more of that unpacked from our staff, as well as a broader understanding of our AMI chart. So right now, we can see for however many number of people are in a household, what AMI is at different levels. In order for us to really understand what that means in terms of take-home pay, we would like to add the tax impacts at each one of the AMIs, as well as much as we can, what our governmental benefits or assistance would be at each, because oftentimes we're talking about our impact to residents of our policies without understanding where that benefits cliff really lies and how that may drive behavior and usage of our policies. So I would open it up to my other committee members if I missed anything in particular, but those are the highlights from the Housing Committee.
Any comments from other committee members? Ms. Mayfield, did I see, all good? Okay. I think that one of the things is that how could the council as a whole or other committees build on your work? I see automatically a connection between, as you develop the ideas of what programs there are, what is the budgetary impact, which would be something that would be a good way to see how that cross-references, what difference it makes, all of the legal issues. So these are really rich and helpful opportunities for us, especially around affordability.
Yes, and thank you for mentioning that, Madam Mayor. The other piece that I think is a linkage to another committee is as we talk about potential waivers of new street requirements and sidewalk cost reimbursements, really making sure, and even the building to zoning district standards of next greater density, we don't want to undermine the work of the community area plans and the policy map, because certainly as the communities has decided, and we have decided through adoption of the map, what should go where, we want to make sure that we're honoring that to the best of our ability, but also building in a way that's going to get us what we are looking for. So those are some of the connections with the TAP committee that we've got to make sure continue to stay strong.
Okay, any comments from council members? Mayor Pro Tem?
I think Ms. Watlington did a good job of kind of wrapping up the entirety of the conversation. As they were going through some of the kind of standing and recurring items, something did come up. Ms. Mayfield brought it up and was seconded by Ms. Johnson, about a conversation around city-owned land and where we stand in terms of disposition of that land, getting council members up to speed about development opportunities and just getting a kind of download on kind of where we're at, as it relates to what council might want to decide kind of moving forward. So I know that's something that comes up year to year with the new council that's at hand. Might be a good time to update the full council on that, where our policies are, and if we want to make any changes, that's something we can have. I think there's also, from a cross horizontal standpoint, there's an economic development standpoint about it. It's not just a housing or neighborhood services aspect of things.
Well, I have a question. Mr. Jones, I know that the work around the equity policy has been, I think, prepared and was discussed by the 3E committee, and I wondered when would that be coming back before council, because a lot of this work especially acknowledges the inequity of infrastructure development in the city that didn't occur when there was not that question about, are we trying to provide equity? So when will we get that policy?
Yes, so thank you, Mayor, members of council. Last week, I think it was last week, in the 30-day memo, we have that queued up for next Monday.
Okay.
And I would like to address, if I may, a comment that Mayor Pro Tem made. Yes, I believe we're working to get into your Thursday packet some information about the $1 leases, some things about, city-owned land, and not just city-owned land for affordable housing, but some time ago you asked about, let's just say, even if we talked about the Belmont Center. So Willie, we're not talking about the Belmont Center, but if we were thinking about other facilities that we own that may not necessarily be something that we think about for Development to also look at those too. So we'll hopefully get a robust package for you in your Thursday packet for a number of these issues around city-owned land, dollar leases, and our opportunities around affordable housing too.
Any other comment? Question? Okay. All right. So let's go to the next committee, followed, Mr. Graham, Jobs and Economic Development.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and good evening, everyone. The Jobs and Economic Development had our first meeting today where we kind of level set for the balance of the year. We welcomed a new member to our midst, District 5 Representative, attended our first meeting. Vice Chairman Dregs, as Mayor, and Wallington round out the committee members itself. We had a robust conversation and agenda today, starting with the ARPA funding that lasted about 30 minutes or longer, and basically we provided an update on the investment that we already have made in ARPA, over $16 million. But more importantly, we talked specifically about those recommendations for how we would utilize $2 million additional dollars going forward, which would be in our round two. Staff presented us a wide variety of options in reference to workforce development, Hire Charlotte, and others. Some with recommendations, others to be determined. And so we've kind of listened to those recommendations, heard a presentation. Again, they focus on hard skills training, soft skills modular curriculum, Hire Charlotte, a one-stop portal, et cetera, a new partnership that we are exploring with Change Please, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Minority business capacity building, small business ecosystem support, corridors and workforce and small business development were some of the issues that we talked about in general, and some we talked about very specifically in terms of dollar amounts being awarded to them. We made no decision today. We'll come back in November and make a decision at our next meeting with a recommendation for our round two funding for the City Council for your consideration. One in particular that we talked about was Change Please. Change Please is a nonprofit that tackles homelessness by helping people back into homes and employment through coffee sales. And it's a unique concept that has come to Charlotte and to our attention. We were able to have the executive director there to make a presentation to the committee. He did a very good job in helping us understand the concept, how it works. It touches a wide variety of touch points that are really important to us. As many of you know, the city is really in the passenger seat when it comes to homelessness. The kind of drives the process for us. And these are the type of programs that we believe we should be interacting with, where we can really provide some strategic direction to helping solve the homeless problem without claiming it as our own. And this certainly touches a number of factors that we are very interested in, which is job training, onward employment placement, in-house first job guaranteeing, onward replacement. So a lot of those things that we're interested in, it kind of meshes to what we do, and it also interconnects with some of the other committees that we work with, i.e. The Housing Committee, Transportation, because all these things kind of work together in terms of getting someone a job, giving them the ability to get to the job, and then hopefully that individual will have the opportunity to buy an affordable apartment and our house in our community. And so we're really excited about that. We want to ask a little bit more questions in reference to the new nonprofit before we present it to the council for full consideration. But we anticipate that we'll kick the tires on that a little bit more, and then we'll bring back a recommendation to the council at our November meeting. In addition, we talked about the arts, and this is the takeaway, Mayor, that I left really excited about. I think, given the opportunity that we have to really shape the discussion in reference to the direction we're going as it relates to arts and science in our community. The Priya did a great job in terms of updating the committee in terms of where she and the staff are in reference to the community engagement process that they're going throughout the community. They've made a number touch points throughout the community, well over 60 zip codes, surveys, virtual meetings, in-person meetings, attending festivals. They were also at a Johnson C. Smith football game talking to fans as they came to the game, talking about the art process. So they're making a concerted effort to make sure that every voice is heard, that individuals who are interested in having their input and how we kind of shape this framework moves forward. They too will come back with additional information at our next meeting as well. One agenda item that we did not get to, and that was the Quarters of Opportunity. Laura Clark with the United Way was there, and while we were not able to entertain her presentation today, I mean, talking with her after the meeting, she gained a lot of information from us by just sitting there in terms of how does the Quarters of Opportunity connect with Hire Charlotte and workforce development? How does it connect with the arts and science in terms of having arts and science on Quarters of Opportunity thoroughfare? So while we were not able to hear her presentation, she thought the time sitting there listening to the committee discussion was time well spent. And so I am very excited about where we're headed to. I think we kind of level set today, making sure that we all kind of know where we're going and how we're going to get there and the charge that we were given. We also entertained a committee assignment that was given to us earlier in the year in October, I think from the mayor. So we got that captured. And so we'll put that in our timeline of things to do. And like I said at the committee meeting, we're ready to work.
All right. So going to the second question, Mr. Graham, what do you believe that the council as a whole could do to help with the work that you've been describing, which I believe if you captured around, first you have the federal funding, which is still coming, workforce development, which we've been working on for many years, as well as the minority business ecosystem and arts and culture. So you've got a lot. So where are the intersections that you believe would make a difference here?
I think the major difference that I kind of noticed right offhand and having talking to the mayor pro tem for the last week or two is just having him being there and also attending all the other committees as well, so he can kind of make that connection where it fits and where it works. And so I think just the collaboration. I mean, the issues relating to economic development doesn't stop at the committee. It bleeds over into what Councilmember Wallington is doing. It bleeds over into the Transportation Committee. And so it's just making sure that we communicate effectively across committee lines, that we utilize the new opportunity with the Mayor Pro Tem to make sure that he understands what's important to me and can relay that when he's attending the Affordable Housing Committee. And certainly him willing to roll up his sleeve and helping us out with some issues related to arts and science. And so just kind of trusting the process and believing in it and seeing where it takes us.
Any other comments for Mr. Graham? Mayor Pro Tem. I'm sorry, Mr. Driggs, Mayor Pro Tem?
I think these two committees going back to back is a good reminder that we'll be having our summit in the next couple weeks, where we're going to try to tie together the housing and neighborhood issues with economic development issues. So it's a good, again, just a good reminder for us, I think, to think in that way. Mr. Driggs, during the cultural arts plan discussion, I agree with his advice that we do have a council discussion, at least have the ability for us as individuals to talk to staff about what are our expected outcomes of our cultural arts plan. Now would be the time to do it if council members, so desire. Now, in terms of maybe in the immediate, but also like right around this time that's happening now, as that plan continues to go on. We don't want to wait till January to say, hey, this is not what we expected. I know I was able to put some stuff into the committee, but now is, again, council members, now is the time to kind of talk about that.
That's what I was going to say. So I think, colleagues, we need to recognize that we have 4 members who weren't around at the time of the work of the ad hoc committee. We also had a diversity of opinion on a number of topics. When we talked about the arts, I don't think the committee fully resolved, and Mr. Graham said a diversity of opinion on this council can't be, right? So I just want us to think about whether or not we need to try and kind of collectively express our expectations, get it down, have a majority vote that says this is the position of this council, and then not come back and interfere with the work of the PRIA and the consultant. Because if there's one suggestion that we have housing we provide for artists, so there's another suggestion that finger painting should be included, or whatever, this is the time, not later, for us to communicate what our expectations are, and so that we can then let them get on with their work. And I don't know how that works exactly, but particularly given that we have 4 new members, I don't think the issue of what each of us thinks about how we spend our arts funding is fully resolved. We have a grassroots agenda, we have a big box agenda, we have an economic development agenda, we have a social justice agenda, and people may have a different view on how. And you wouldn't necessarily see from the work that the consultant is doing differences. Like, it seems to cover it all, you know, and you could look at it and think, okay, I'm comfortable with that. But there's actually a lot of detail in there that could bubble up later and then cause people to say, what? You know, I thought we were going to do so-and-so on the grassroots level, or I thought we were going to do this. So, I mean, I've suggested to you before, we also need to talk to our private funding partners and just make sure that we're on track towards an outcome that the funders, all of us who write the checks, feel aligns with what our purpose was when we set out to invest.
So both the Mayor Pro Tem and Councilmember Driggs have made excellent points. Is there a process that's in place to get that done? Or what would be the next step if you were attempting to say, what do your expectations in the cultural arts plan? I know that they have people working on it. I don't know what, but I'm just asking, what was your expectation for the next step if you're going to actually get this on the table before this comes out as a report?
So our goal was to minimize the involvement of this group, right? We wanted to have artists making decisions, and we didn't want us, who are not artists, to be like writing grants or anything like that. Mm-hmm. But I think if we had a charter of some kind, or just a document, and we draft it, and it says these are the priorities that we have, or these are the things that we expect the culture plan to accomplish, and then we get a majority vote around that, so that individual opinions about something are no longer part of the conversation, and we give again, PRIA and the consultants the benefit of that input.
So again, I'm going to keep you driving. Is that something you're asking the manager to make happen, or was it something that the council, how did you leave it so that we don't leave it unfinished tonight? We need to tackle this
we
and do
need
it
to know where
tonight.
that starts. At one time, I'd suggested that the city attorney look at a format for a charter and just say, okay, can we build into this? Because the charter is all the rules around the operation later on. I thought I heard, for example, some uncertainty about whether our board was going to be the grant-making body. That's a pretty basic question, right? So is the board now working on the creation of a culture plan without the expectation that they will be the continuing kind of body that makes all the decisions? So there's some pretty basic questions, I think. And Priya, I'm happy to talk to you. I mean, you know, Ms. Eisel was doing a lot of this before, so we need to figure out how to fill that vacuum. But if you understand my point, we need to make sure we have council on board with the work you're doing.
In addition, Madam.
Well, I'm sorry, Ms. Mayfield hasn't spoken yet. So Ms. Mayfield?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So kind of a follow-up on Councilmember Driggs, just for clarification, because I have had a chance to attend at least 2 of the meetings to hear from the artist community. So I agree that we, as a council body, should be looking at the language of our artist community, opposed to us saying, here's what we think. I support the idea of having some language brought back, and I think this council, previous council, has already heard from the artist community and already has some language as to recommendations. But I do agree that there has to be a point where council gets together and talk about what are the big concerns. Because I know, for me, I can speak to not only housing affordability, and that's across the city for all areas of service and employment, but also how do we create space for our artist community to convene and do their art when we're looking at increased cost of rental space. I believe that the city has an opportunity to step in and be a part of that conversation, but that should be a conversation that we have as a group, not at the dais or in this setting. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
So I want to, before we go around to circle again, I wanted to give the manager an opportunity to talk about what he sees as this accountability, because it's going to take someone to do this work.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. So I was able to listen to a portion of all four committees today, and did hear the arts and culture discussion. And I think this is the takeaway that I heard, is that, well, let me take one big step backwards. So we have two things that are going on simultaneously. One, there's a council discussion about setting a guideline, a framework, whatever the right words are, for how we move forward. And Mr. Driggs, you have been vocal about this. Everybody from the ad hoc committee have been vocal about this for months, okay? I believe at some point, as early as November, the council will get something from the consultant to look at in terms of, and I'm looking at Priya, in terms of what they see as a part of our ecosystem. And then sometime in the, I don't know if you call it January, winter, but sometime in the January, February timeframe, there would be the draft of a report. Did I get that right? Okay. So what I would ask is twofold, and so I'll just throw something up, the straw man, is that having that council structure or constitutional charter together sooner rather than later, I think it's very important. I also heard allow the consultants to do their work in the community. But I think that the one thing that intrigued me, which I think is where you ended up, is that a subset of the ED committee, the mayor pro tem, the chair, and the vice chair are going to start working on, with Priya and with staff, what would be a charter. And I believe the sooner that comes out, the better. So that's my only ask. And the other thing I'd like to make sure that I am tracking is that because we did not have the presentation last week for the full council, I was going to put it on for next Monday. However, so I've been down this road before, okay? So if you're going to hear the same thing on Monday that you heard today, are we not utilizing your time as best? So if I could get some guidance of how you'd like to proceed, that we will act accordingly.
So I had Mr. Graham followed by the Mayor Pro Tem. Anybody else over here? Okay.
Thank you, thank you, Madam Mayor. And the city manager just articulated what I was going to share with the council in terms of the informal working group to really kind of steer this thing to a successful conclusion, knowing that former Councilwoman Isla played a significant role in terms of shepherding this. We all said that we would make sure that we touch base with every council member to make sure that they're up to date in terms of what we're doing and where we're going, and that we would do that sooner than later, and we would work with the city manager to provide the necessary staff support where needed. So I think he's spot on in his comments.
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem.
So I would point out that the entire council has not gotten updated on where we're at for the arts culture plan, including new members. You know, I think, you know, I guess, while or even before we have that smaller group meeting, you know, I think I would like to put it out to the full council. What is the purpose of this plan? You know, when we did our Comp 2040 plan, it was, you know, a plan that guided future land use and future growth strategies. So the question, and I think with the ad hoc committee, kind of left purposefully ambiguous, was for us to decide with staff and with the community, what kind of outcomes do we want? Is this going to guide future city councils to enact policy that is within our policy frameworks, whether it be things like affordable housing, affordable workspaces, workforce developments? That's kind of what I saw it as. But some people might see it as more of a comprehensive community document that, you know, might say it would be good to have music lessons and art lessons in all public school students. Well, we don't really have domain over that, so I don't think that's necessarily a useful policy guiding document for us, but the council as a whole might decide that's where the direction we want to go. So I don't really know how to kind of tailor that without hearing from the colleagues as a whole, which direction we want to go. What do we expect the outcomes of this plan to be?
Yes, please, Mr. Drakes.
So, first of all, we had the idea of creating the culture plan because for years we had been kicking a can down the road. We had been providing a level amount of funding to the Arts and Science Council, and then as private funding to them dried up, it became apparent that we needed to do more. And at that point, we thought we need to be more intentional, right? So we need to invest more, but we need to do so with a clear set of outcomes in mind. And Mr. Winston, you're right. I think that we kind of broke off almost in committee, in the ad hoc committee, because we ran up against some difficult questions and didn't really know what the answer was. And I'm not sure if our new members have even seen the memo that the ad hoc committee wrote, because you should see that in order to understand where council was last year. So the question was raised, in fact, I think in our meeting, will we have some sort of ordinance that gets created on the back of the culture plan? So is it analogous to the 2040 plan followed by an ordinance? I don't really see it that way. I think the culture plan is sort of a vision statement, and that it just sort of lays out where we want to be, and then we have, again, this board, or we have an arts director whose job it is to take the resources we provide and move us in that direction. And we will be able, if we see a departure from that direction, to point out, hey, that's not in the plan. I don't think we need to legislate around that personally. But the main thing is to have that plan land in a place that is okay with everybody. And that means that some of the things we didn't talk about yet, we probably still need to, because you in particular have highlighted some goals or priorities that aren't necessarily mine, frankly. We need to work that out.
Thank you. I think this is particularly helpful for tonight's discussion because it has a budgetary impact. It has an impact on our existing agreements for the seven facilities that we own and we don't program, but we own, and there are investments that haven't been even, I doubt seriously if all of those buildings are paid for. So there's probably still debt on them, and yet we're trying to do something in a way that at the time we were talking about using federal dollars for. Those federal dollars will expire, so we have to have a plan that's actually around whatever the purpose is that's decided. It provides policy and it provides funding, and there are multiple opportunities for audiences. And I really don't know what happened, because I was interviewed with Mr. Winston, Mayor Pro Tem, well, he was Mr. Winston at the time, Mayor Pro Tem now, and we had a discussion with the consultant. I don't know if everyone had that discussion or if that was well, I mean, this is late, but I remember we sat down with them and had a conversation. I don't know what happened as a result of that. But there were some very distinct differences between what we were trying to do, and I don't know what happened in that situation. But that's not a bad thing, because we're talking about it now. and it includes the people that will have to actually make the decision on it. So it's a good thing that we didn't make a decision too soon on it, because now I believe everyone on the council should have the ability to get any update that's possible. But I think the question on purpose is really, really essential. And I also think the question is, and what do you not want to see in this plan? Because there are many things that people will say are really good, but if we're going to get a real analysis of the council, it has to be what you really want and what you really don't want, because that's where the middle begins to meet and the compromises have to be made. And so if we're going to do this, Mr. Jones, let's just try to figure out a way that everybody can participate fully, as well as be able to express, what your beliefs are or purposes are, because I'm not an arts and culture person. You can be a lot of things, but there are some things by principle that we believe in for our city, and these things ought to be meshed together in a way that we can have a debate and see how what we want to do and what we don't want to do will result in a document that gives us guidance for at least 5 years. I don't know that we can write 20-year plans anymore, but I believe that we ought to at least write them until we've paid off those buildings. That may be better for definition for me, is to say that as long as we own these facilities and they're operated, how do they operate? And we ought to have a plan that includes that. So, Mr. Jones, and I think we can probably, unless there are other comments. Okay.
So thank you,
Manager.
Mayor, members of council. My 24-year-old daughter tells me from time to time, know your audience, okay? So, right now my audience is, the mayor and council, and clearly there's a bit of concern about how this plane will land, okay? What I will say for the previous members and the new members of council, what you have is basically a 3-year runway. And this funding arrangement, the public-private partnership, will get you through not only this fiscal year, but the next fiscal year too. So I don't want you to think that we must have a decision, tonight. But I would say that it is very important that this charter comes together, because I will tell you, and I'll just be candid, I do believe we put the letter in maybe a Thursday packet, and maybe we have to figure out a way to not put everything in a Thursday packet, okay? But, you can just look at some previous cultural plans, and I will tell you that some of them may align very differently than the things that I've been hearing from the council. So I think it's very important as we decide who is going to be the participant. I think it's very important that we understand that right now this was designed to go for 3 years, and there's 1 more year of funding. And as we learned this July, before we do anything significant with funding again, we need to have some direction from this council.
Okay, Mr. Bakari?
I think the easiest way forward from this point is to understand that we created a memo that, among other things, established an organization and a leader, and established a budget that was pulled together in public-private match. The step that's at hand right now that has to be accomplished, that then informs everything else beyond it, is some kind of overall charter / policy vision guidance from council that we all need to be part of crafting. It can't be crafted for us. And we all have to come to agreement on what the majority of us agree upon in that body of work. And I think the easiest way to do that is to create a very simple table that has a bucket for things that we already have historically spent money on, the bigs, things of that nature, and things that we don't but would like to start doing in the future. And to simplify it, everyone needs to come in and put policy level, outcome level statements of what they would like to see in there. And that has to come from us. The 11 of us have to put that in there. And then we have to come out and then figure out how to whittle that down to what we agree on. And that is what informs the body that is then off creating the arts and cultural plan. The plan cannot be done without that, because the plan by definition, and the way we set this up, is there to go take these high-level vision outcomes and go figure out how short, mid, and long-term, and short-term is 1, 2, and 3 years in the funding model. Mid and long are beyond that. We already did some work to predefine short in the 1 year. So that plan is not to come back and tell us what they want. That plan is to go execute what we are tying our dollars to the outcomes. And once that's understood, then it's about deploying those and us putting the parameters around, okay, we expect grant making to occur here, not here, tactical things of that nature. And then we're out of the weeds of it, and it operates on its own. Now, we can be informed constantly about what the committee is finding from the community that we may not have contemplated, but we have to go change the thing that are tied to our public dollars before anyone goes off and decides they're going to change a plan or allocate money towards it. And I think the last piece in this is, once we craft and agree upon our plan, we have to go to the private sector and say, is anything a non-starter in here for you? And if it is, we have to negotiate through that. And if it is and we can't negotiate through that, we have to revisit, are we going to do a public-private partnership? But it all has to start with us crafting this table and what our policy-level vision statements and outcomes are going to be under the areas of existing spend and new desired spend.
And would that be short and long-term? And how do you define
think
some of
we-
that?
I think- yeah.
Aspirational could be 20 years, but, you know, I'm really thinking that we need something, because we have been at this for a while, and it needs some definition around the timing and the framework.
I think it needs to be all of that, plus even a little bit more. In the short, it needs to be, if there are specifics for year 1, 2, and 3, it needs to call those out. Otherwise, it can just be generic. But we also have to point where the target is going to be, because that's what the ultimate strategic plan is about from the arts community. So that's where the mid, which define mid, maybe that's 5 years, maybe long is 10+ years beyond that, so that we're marching towards a greater outcome and we know we're biting off chunk number 1 now. So I think it has to not just have in there, but designate, like, for example, year 1, expectations are that bigs will be funded at pre-pandemic levels. Like, very specific for things that we already negotiated and agreed on the private sector that unlock those dollars. And as we get to more year 2 and 3, where we haven't had those negotiations, I think we can be a little more generic, but we have to figure that out.
And how do we fill in the gaps that we might have, or our definitions of it? Help me understand. So, for example, I want a soundstage, and I want that in the 5th year. And I don't know what a soundstage is, but I know that other people have them, so I want them. Do I just say, I want a soundstage because I know other people have them? Is that kind of the thing that we're talking about?
Well, so this is something I mentioned as well. The way that we're kind of hands-off this a little bit is the economic development kind of approach to it, that we wouldn't necessarily just be picking out specific targets, but from an economic development standpoint, we say, we want to target the film and television business here
But
in
I don't
Charlotte.
want to do that. I'm just asking you, I'm just
well,
making my list.
yeah,
and
but I'm just
asking you,
saying,
do I
but-
get to put down soundstage because I want one?
Well, no, that's what I'm saying.
I can't.
We would say, well, do we want to just a soundstage, or do we want to, in order for a soundstage to work, we have to have a more developed film and television industry here. And what we do is we target sectors, we
Yes.
target industries. That is within.
No one should be targeting the specifics of a sound stage any more than we are targeting specific nonprofits or groups that can go execute. This is about macro strategy setting. And at the end of the day, we're 11 people. If 6 people say, I want a sound stage by year 4, well, then that's what's going to happen. But the spirit of what we should be doing is not micromanaging Priya and that group, but giving them film and television by year 4, mature metrics, and then we fill in the blanks of what those measurements of how we'll measure them, because our role isn't telling them what to do, it's telling them what we want to occur as an outcome, and then how we'll measure that when it comes time for us to put more money in the pot.
I'm reminded of Miss Anderson's analogy when we were having orientation about rocks and boulders. And I'm just really trying to figure out, am I a rock or a boulder right now in some of the
Well, I think it's,
situations?
and I'll speak to
And
the whole day, this entire day was a little frustrating for me, not because everyone was together working in one day, which was great. The level of tactical that this was really astounding to me. I think it was, like, we needed to be at a strategic level, and I think the only thing we really accomplished today were all the committee meetings were in one day. I think we need to get out of the weeds for a little bit and figure out how to get to a strategic level, and it feels like a boulder to a lot of folks, but that's where this body's supposed to operate.
Don't disagree with that. That's why I think this is such an important exercise, and to figure out where we have the commonalities of expertise and informed, and people that are experts with information about this, and people that don't know anything about it, and the impact that it has in this community, and how we talk about transparency and you know, talking to the people, and if we come in without that kind of framework for it, I don't know what TV, I'm not saying anything, but I just want us to recognize that this is an opportunity for a strategic effort, and to do it well, I think it's going to be really great for us to accomplish. So I think that we have an idea of, or do you have an idea?
Well, I would like some guidance.
Okay, so tell us,
Okay.
what are your questions?
Okay.
We would too, right?
Is this on the agenda for next Monday, or is the subgroup of ED committee members going to talk with the council to get their ideas?
All right, here, I have three folks over here that would like to talk, so let's just start with Mr. Mitchell, and then we'll just go down the line. Mr. Mitchell?
City Manager, I'll be very brief. I would like to see that presentation. Maybe you condense it, but I would like to see that presentation next Monday.
Ms. Molina?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm listening to the conversation, and I think about, as a new council member, what my deliverable is. Like, I believe a lot of what we do, we kind of synthesize a lot of thoughts, a lot of possibilities, and then we inform policy with those thoughts and those possibilities. I see this role, and maybe someone can help me really better understand it. We are program managers. We manage several programs, and we depend on subject matter experts to guide us, like what the mayor said. I won't pretend to know what art is. Like, that's not my particular skill set. I know how to manage a project, though. I know how to monitor a baseline, and I know about, milestones and key stakeholders. And as long as I can do that, I can do it in any setting. And I can inform policy as long as I have sound financial and quantitative and qualitative information. And so that's the way I see this role. And so, just thinking about our conversation around art today, I know that we are here to inform what policy looks like, but I think without the proper information of what the art community really needs, and what quantitative information is tied directly to that, and how we can take that and make a policy as a result, because our policies are driven fiscally, from what I understand about policy. And so the main standpoint for me would be not only just the ideas, because I know that we bring the ideas to bear, but from a policy perspective, I see it very differently. And it's not so much as what I would like to have happen, because I have no opinion one way or the other. I don't even feel like I should come to the table with that, because it's not my particular skill set. But I'm here to inform the policy around it based on the information that I gather.
Okay. Ms. Ajmira?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, as part of the ED committee, I did review the presentation. So, at the committee, it was decided that chairman, vice chairman, and Mr. Winston will get together and we'll have some recommendations for the full council. So I would like to really see that before we have another presentation again, the same thing. So at least we kind of know what, because I know Mr. Winston had some concerns today at the committee meeting. So I just want to see some of those concerns getting addressed, along with Mr. Drake's before we discuss this same presentation again.
So I'm going to make a suggestion, unless there's someone on this side of the room that has an additional comment. I think that several people have seen the presentation and several people have not. If you have not seen the presentation, then, Mr. Jones, I think if you would just raise your hand if you've not seen the presentation. I don't think I have either, so we'll schedule a time, Mr. Jones, to see the presentation, and you can see whose
Can I
hands
make a
are up.
recommendation?
Yeah, of course.
I think to your question of guidance, there's probably 1,000 ways to do it. This is probably, in my opinion, the most effective. It has to come from us, but we're at varying levels of understanding in the detail, and it's going to take a little handholding. I think you and staff should come together with a way to get structured expert elicitation from us, basically. What is our things that we want in there? And some of us, like when you come to me, I'm going to be able to go and fill in this template very easily of the things I want. Others who, this is the first time they're hearing it, are going to need staff member to walk them through the history, and they need to be prepared, so that way you knock it out one-on-one, and then everyone has a chance to fill in the things that they would like to see in that policy level vision. And then once you have that, then we have a real thing to have a conversation about as a body. But as long as we're just talking about other people's updates, we're just going to be in this death loop of who's been updated and what do we want to do. No 2 or 3 council members can take this away and solve it. Every single person, while you may update me individually and Dante differently from that perspective, the thing that has to be pristine is my input of what I want in there as an individual council member is captured in the words that I'm comfortable, and I've said, yeah, that's what I want all of council to be able to discuss. And then we need to figure out a way to streamline that. It's a body of work. I don't know if that can get done before another meeting, but it's critical it get done before we end the process of creating a cultural plan.
I think, Mr. Bakari, all I was suggesting is that people get the basics so that they can understand what we've been doing, and that I agree, we cannot go into this without everybody being informed. So the meeting, we'll have a small group meeting with those folks that have not had a chance to see the plan. And then I think the next question that Mr. Jones asked was whether, so it would not be Monday, it might be Monday, but it would be scheduled for those that raised their hands that have not seen the actual document and had the questions and all of that opportunity to ask those questions. So we'll schedule that with the staff. Mr. Jones will work through all of those details. I think the second question is, the committee made a recommendation that there would be, I think, a discussion among 3 people on this committee. And that I think it would be best in some ways, there are lots of ways to do, as Ms. Molina has said, lots of ways to do this kind of project, and we just need to settle on one that works for everyone on the council. And so I would say that would be a charge to that small group committee that's doing this, and as long as we get to the place that we understand what we want and what we don't want, that's where I think we can start, at least even if we have to take a second stab at it. Mr. Jones has said that this is a 3-year runway and an opportunity to build a long-term plan. We don't have to do it all tonight, I don't believe. I have Ms. Watlington, then we'll come to Mr. Driggs, and then we'll come to Mr. Graham. Ms. Watlington?
2 things real briefly, just for those who may not be aware, forgive me if I'm giving you information you already know, the arts and culture update is in our iLegislate, so you can at least view it whenever you want. And then the other thing I was going to say is, I think that there are some of us who feel very strongly about particular points in arts and culture, and I think that there are others who, to Ms. Molina's point, this isn't necessarily our area of expertise. If you've got passion around it, just tell us what you want. And let's not make this bigger than what it needs to be. If you feel particularly that there are deal breakers or things that have to be in there, let's go ahead and put that on the table and we can bake it in, because I think many of us will come along.
All right. Mr. Driggs?
I just wanted to say, I think, I don't hear a lot of disagreement here. In fact, we are already having the conversation we need to, but we need to put some structure around it, right? So the thought was for a couple of us to figure out how to put structure around it. That's all. We're not going to speak for the council, but do we have a questionnaire that we circulate to everybody? Do we conduct interviews? What is our process for getting that input? Because if I just say to you, what do you think the arts plan should look like? You go, well, I guess a museum, I'm not sure. So I think maybe there's a questionnaire or something that actually lets people see what it is that they're being asked to respond to, collect that. And Priya and Joy have heard it because we had a lot of one-on-one conversations, but it's not your job to synthesize all of that into a proposal for the council as such. So that's where we have to kind of, and again, not have it served up to us by somebody else. So that's all I'm saying. Maybe we could draft something and have a conversation with everybody and then hold together the foundation for a conversation, a discussion in council.
All right. Mr. Graham?
I think the vice chairman summarized exactly what I was going to say. And so just one question. I think everyone other than the new council members were interviewed, right, and kind of shared our perspective.
11 in the previous council, all but one council member did do individual interviews with confidential interviews with the consulting team that they took notes on those presentations, and then we shared what they heard through those interviews in the small group meetings that the mayor referenced.
Okay, so a lot of some of this work, it's already been done, and so just allow us the opportunity to kind of get our hands around it. Obviously, I agree with Councilmember Bakari. I would love to fly this thing at 30,000 feet and not get in the weeds, and I think Councilmember Wallington makes a good point. Just tell us what you want, right, and we can move on. What's important to you?
Okay. All right, Ms. Johnson?
Yeah, that's just what I was going to say. We've met with a consultant to discuss this, because as I was writing down more art in District 4 and diversity, I'm like, I already gave these answers to someone. So, yeah, we've met with a consultant, so maybe if that information is compiled and then you ask the new members, and we're not reinventing the wheel.
I think that some of this is the level of it. It's like, you say more art, but now does that mean what? And I think if you have an answer for that, I think that the members of council want to know that.
I might have given that information, but yeah, we've
Oh, if
been,
you've
we've
already
been
given
down
it
this
to
road
them, that's-
before, yes.
I don't think our discussion or my interview was that detailed. So now, Ms. Ajmira, and then we're going to come back to the ED report.
Yeah, we all, well, we all have one-on-ones with Mr. Jones, so he knows exactly what are our concerns and what are the challenges. At least in my one-on-one, I have shared with you, here are the things that I would like to see. I mean, when it comes to arts and culture, I really look to subject matter experts to really form an opinion, because some of us are sort of neutral. We are listening to Priya and Arts and Cultural Advisory Board and just artists. We don't come with, oh, here we want X, Y, and Z. So I just think, Mr. Jones, I think you already have an idea of where everyone is. And for the new ones that you don't, I'm sure we still have time to go through that. But I don't know if we need another presentation just to go over that again.
So we will only tailor that presentation to those that choose to have it. So that would be exactly where we're going to go. We're trying to tailor this thing so that we can move on. Okay. All right, I have two.
I have no more words.
Okay,
so.
So if we can go from the arts and cultural plan, I did want to mention two things that I think that I would like for the committee to consider, especially when we're talking about the workforce development. Last week, I had the opportunity to meet with the Atrium Board of Directors and the work that they're talking about, and I just really think that the school is going to open in 2 years, and we need to have a plan. They're not going to do the whole 20,000 people in 2 years, but we need a workforce development plan, whether it's with Central Piedmont or whomever, to be able to prepare people for those jobs. And so I'd like for the committee to actually have some conversation, because we are putting in public money into that project, and we need to look for the benefits of the jobs that are coming out, and especially those 2-year certification jobs. And I don't know if there's a plan for that or not, but I think that's an important thing for us to tell our community, because we invested in that. And then the second thing that I wanted to say is that I know the Foundation for the Carolinas is doing an open grant, I believe it's called, and they have a program, there is a program called My Daily Bread that I think has similarities to the program that you have, and they're different. One's coffee, one's bread, but they are taking young, primarily men of color in the juvenile justice system and giving them another way of doing this work. And I'd like to put you in touch with the person that runs that, and I believe the foundation's coordinator is Tracy Russ, so that we can continue to look at where are these programs effectively working for especially young men of color in the juvenile justice system. Any other questions or comments on ED?
Duly noted.
Okay, thank you very, very much, everyone. So who's going to take our budget and governance report? Ms. Sajmira?
Well, speaking of budget and governance, we didn't discuss anything to do with budget.
But everybody else did.
But yes, everyone else did. But we did discuss governance and intergovernmental. So speaking of governance, well, before I dive into that, we did talk, well, Mr. Cagle did walk us through some of the standing items for the budget and governance, especially our audit plan, our budget, and other items that will be just standing. Well, one item I do hope, along with my colleagues on the committee, agree with me on this, is that hopefully the next topic, which is the virtual meeting, won't be a standing topic, which it has been in the past. So before I dive into that, I just want to recognize my vice chair, Mr. James Mitchell, committee members, Ms. Mayfield, Ms. Anderson, and Mr. Bukhari. We discussed virtual meetings and remote meetings policy. So there is Rule 28A and Rule 28B. Well, 28A, it's for the committee meetings. We already decided on that last Monday. Majority of the council had decided that there will be more flexibility for committee meetings, so anyone can join virtually, no exceptions. And when it comes to the council meeting, virtual option, our city attorney provided a recommendation. Because of the potential legal challenge, our city attorney does not recommend that we explore that right now. So the committee took an action, it was 3-2, to move forward with city attorney's recommendations. So that's what the committee's recommendation is right now, and hopefully this topic won't come back to the committee. That's where it is right now.
All right.
Okay?
Any questions on that topic? Ms. Johnson?
Yeah, I just wanted a little more elaboration on the statute that speaks to our ability to meet virtually. Mr. Baker?
The question again is?
Well, I have some questions in writing, so I just wanted them for the public consumption. What's the statute that speaks to our participation and our ability to meet virtually?
So as I said in the committee meeting, there is no specific statute that addresses committee meetings. There is a statute that allows the council to develop council procedures that are not inconsistent with state law, or I think that the term is the established parliamentary rules, and that's the basis for the city council procedures that you have put together that includes your committee meetings.
So is there a statute that prohibits us from meeting virtually?
A statute that prohibits you from meeting? No. There is well, you've asked the question, I will give you the answer. But as you know, we need authority to do something, not a prohibition against doing something, to be able to act within our authority.
Is there a statute that gives us authority to have virtual committee meetings?
No, there is not something that specifically addresses that.
So then the recommendation to meet virtually for committee meetings and not council meetings that's within council's purview? I mean, is there a reason that we're dissecting?
Yes, as I said this morning, committee meetings are part and parcel of how council has chosen to conduct its business, which I think are part of the procedures that the council has put together. So there's not a statute that's going to say you can have a subcommittee in your council. It's just part of your rules of procedure of how you've done it. Council meetings are very different than committee meetings. Yes, the council meetings are where you go and change policy, procedure, you're changing land use designations, and you're entering into millions of dollars of contracts every Monday. Committee meetings are to review certain procedures and to make recommendations to council. So I am less concerned that you will be challenged by having a subcommittee meeting of the council than you will be if you make if you go with virtual meetings at council meetings.
Do you know if there are any other jurisdictions in North Carolina that are currently having virtual council meetings or looking at virtual council meetings?
I think a number of jurisdictions are looking to see if, given how we acted or were able to act during the state of emergency, whether or not there's some flexibility from the General Assembly to seek additional legislation that would allow us to have virtual meetings in certain situations. So I think most communities are interested, looking at it, but in terms of communities that are right now having council meetings virtually, I'm not aware of any right now.
Okay, and then there was a time where this council had a approved motion to meet virtually, exclusive or outside of the state of emergency. And that, we had that for, I don't know, that was approved for, I don't know if it's a year or almost a year?
I think
that legal?
The council sunsetted that in, I think, 6 months afterwards, and I think that was part of my recommendation, was to sunset, but that all happened during the state of emergency. And it was not based on my recommendation.
Okay, but we did have that, we had that rule, and it was,
The council, I think in October of 2020, did vote 6-5 to have virtual meetings indefinitely, yes.
okay. And then my last question is, what percentage, I guess, of our decisions are subject to legal challenge?
Theoretically, every decision that you make is subject to legal challenge.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
I'll more briefly recap what I said in committee today, which is this will keep coming back up until we actually, as a council, vote and decide what our will is, not have it presented to us in a predisposed manner of you can or can't do this, or it is our recommendation you can or can't. At the end of the day, we know we can already do committee meetings, and it is quite plausible that through one action or another, council members' meetings could be done as well. I personally am at a point where I wouldn't support that, but as long as and I think we should be in person so that we can get back to working towards becoming a higher performing team. But at the end of the day, it will always keep coming back up if we don't, as a group, say, what is our will, full remote, full in-person, hybrid, for what ways, and then have staff and the attorney go figure out how to make that work. Or if we all say, no, we're not going to do it as a majority, then it's dead for good. Until we do that, literally, we are tap dancing around the will of the council, and that's why it keeps coming up and it doesn't go away. So I don't know a simpler way than that, but that's the root cause if anyone's looking for it.
Mr. Bakari, in spite of Charlotte talks, you and I agree on this one. So I'm going to put it on the agenda. We can hear what the committee says, you can take a vote on it and just get it done. It's either you want it or you don't. Either you can talk to the public about how you're going to explain it, what you're doing, and your rationale for it. Everybody will get a chance to speak. Prepare your speeches for no more than 3 minutes, and then we'll just vote, and then it'll be done. Ms. Watlington?
Amen to that. Just two things as input into said vote. You mentioned here that you weren't aware of any other jurisdictions that were currently doing it. I know we spoke before about the town of St. James. Did they change theirs?
I'm not aware that there are triggers in St. James, and I don't know that they're routinely meeting virtually right now.
Okay, but there's nothing that has indicated that their actual provisions have changed. You just don't know
Where
what
is
they're-
is it St. James?
Uh-huh.
Where is that?
I think it's near the
It's in
coast.
Brunswick County.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, in Brunswick, okay, all right, gotcha. You know, they're probably, what's their population?
It's small.
Less than 1,000.
Yeah, they pay an attorney outside, like a private attorney, to write all their stuff, so it's small.
Before we hear from that county, I would like to say, it does not matter your size. The internet usually works in all varieties, and we appreciate you.
Actually,
and are
the
not being
digital
the great
divide-
state of Mecklenburg.
Wait, put your plug in for,
The internet may not be in every spot, but I guarantee you
Yeah.
it's at the
Put your-
government center.
put your plug in for closing the digital divide in rural communities.
I really wonder that because a lot of our legislation is written for cities under 250 and some over 250, and they apply differently. So I was just wondering if they were over or under. No harm intended to St. James at all.
And the
Yeah,
spotlight
St.
is-
Luke, St. Matthew, St. Mark as well.
And
Well,
the spotlight
my
is
question-
different.
My question is simply, what do they have and what's there and how long has it been? I already know the answer to these questions. Me personally, I've mentioned where I stand on this. I absolutely agree. We just vote and move on. The issue that I have is that if it's a question of whatever risk we're willing to take on as a council, let's talk about that. But let's not say that it's not possible or it's not being done. We could decide that the circumstances are different in another town, and that's okay. But it's important, I think, that we talk about what the facts are. My second question in regards to that is our current Rule 28B allows for council meetings under certain circumstances. In the event that we go with your recommendation, that means we have to update what's currently on our books. And if that's the case, are we at risk today?
So keep in mind that Rule 28 was established well before the pandemic.
Correct.
So there have been changes to the laws specific to the pandemic. If we were starting with a blank sheet today, I'm not sure that I would recommend B. In fact, in the committee meeting, I said if we were going to go in any direction, it would be backwards, away from virtual council meetings in any situation than forwards. Again, that's based on the fact that the General Assembly meticulously went through at least 4 or 5 statutes and then created an entire statutory framework to allow virtual meetings during the pandemic. I think when they stepped into that area to say, this is what you can do or how to do it during the pandemic, I believe that it took away some of the, quite frankly, the lack of certainty that existed prior to the statutes that were put out there. So I left it as, I think the question was the committee piece. We had changes, the edits that we presented to the committee, and that was voted on. At this stage, I'm not recommending any changes to subsection B, but if I was going to make recommendations, it would be going away from virtual meetings in any situation, but because these are so very limited, the likelihood, and even then, as I mentioned in the committee meeting, in subsection A, there's a specific reference to members being entitled to vote and fully participate in the business of the committee meetings. There's not the equivalent mention about being entitled to vote or fully participate in subsection B there. So I believe what the goal of the council at that time was to simply allow for meetings to, basically to get to a quorum to do very limited matters, because it just refers to attendance, not actually voting.
But the reason for a quorum is so that you can actually vote. So the assumption is that if there's a quorum, it's so that person can participate fully, because otherwise you still wouldn't have a quorum to conduct business. But either way, that answers my question. I look forward to it being on the agenda. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. All right, is there anything else from, on this topic? Let's go to your next one.
The last item we had on our agenda is overview of our city's federal and state legislative agenda. And a committee had great insight into how we approach that. Mr. Fenton walked us through the process. We will be developing a strategy for building relationships with our state legislators. So stay on the lookout for that, but that's going to be on our agenda for November. So for our November agenda, we are going to have three items. One is the financial stewardship, boards and commissions, and then our annual audit plan. So those three items will be on our next agenda. So that's all we have from the committee.
Any questions for the committee? Any comments? Mayor Pro Tem?
Mayor Lyles, I think just on the topic of the legislative agenda and the kind of nuanced difference between the kind of engagement that we've done in the past around our legislative agenda versus having a kind of consistent presence in Raleigh. I think those are two different things. And I know you've had a conversation with myself and Ms. Ajmera, but thought it might be helpful if the whole council kind of heard what the intent is.
We've always had a strategy to go and get what we wanted. We would have our legislative package adopted, and we would go up and spend some time. But I think that many of the issues that we have now are not just based in, well, what we want, but it's what can we do to help other people in this region get also what they want so that we build a stronger regional area of, I think, collaboration, but also just because I think that we are not known in Raleigh. I've watched a little bit of Joe Bruno's interview last night. It was a shameless plug, Joe. And I heard a former state legislator talk about being in the room and things like that. And we're not trying to get in the room, but we're certainly trying to be on outside so we can eavesdrop enough. So the whole point of this is to be known and visible and present, so when there is an opportunity to do some of the things that we want to do, not just as a city, but as a region, we have built a relationship where there's an opportunity to support other initiatives around the state and not be singled out so much, and as well to support those initiatives that we think that we can accomplish as a city for our own residents. So I believe this is important. We have a shot at a new legislative year coming up, and I would certainly like to see us go at it in a bipartisan way, in a way that we're talking about things that we all agree are important to our community, and that we work on a plan to do that. So that's what the charge to our intergovernmental group is this year.
Yep, so I think pretty much committee agreed that they're gonna accompany me to Raleigh. No, I'm just kidding. But we will be developing a strategy, and we will have a plan moving forward to have more presence in Raleigh.
Yeah, too often we're represented by the people that we pay to represent us, and we need to put some our own skin in the game, so, all right? Let's see, that leaves us one more committee to report on, and so our TAP committee, Mr. Driggs.
Good, I think everybody's tired by now, I can keep it short. So we met today, we had initially, as I think all the committees did, this overview of our committee process. And I should report the other members of the committee are Dante Anderson as vice chair, Mr. Graham, Ms. Johnson, and Mr. Mitchell. The only thing I'll mention about the initial committee procedure was that we have in this committee no current referrals in TAPD or TPD. We have standing items, which are the 2040 Comprehensive Plan, the UDO, the Strategic Mobility Plan, and the 2030 Transit System Plan. So not too much, no problem. What we did today, Allison Craig provided a very compact and helpful overview of our UDO process, past, present, and future. And it was a recap. I think it was for the benefit of committee members, since we have only one continuing committee member in this committee. A couple of things I did want to point out. In the context of the conversations we've had in zoning meetings about how do we actually apply our rules to current petitions, and I think it's been apparent from some of our conversations that the criteria that we use are not clear to everybody, or that we need to be. So I just thought I would highlight one slide that she used in which, in reference to the UDO, it says, "Council cannot use the UDO as a basis for land use decisions until the effective date of June 1st, 2023. UDO currently provides staff guidance and principles for desired outcomes. Council can ask how a project relates to UDO standards or how the existing zoning." So I'm not sure this is the answer. I think we have work to do in order to have clarity, for all of us to have clarity about exactly what metrics or criteria we use in approving these petitions. I did suggest in the meeting that we ought to have a strategy session set aside for a discussion about how this works, instead of going into zoning meetings and having these spontaneous debates. And I had discussed with Ms. Craig and Ms. Babson how we might put something like that together so that there is pretty clear guidance, because this gives you an indication, but it says you can't use the UDO as a basis for land use decisions. At the same time, right now, our plan consistency is based on the policy map, right? So we're looking and saying, okay, that's consistent with an N1, but it wants to be an R3. And how does that work? So I think it would be helpful outside of zoning to take this information, which was very helpful. I won't try to kind of reiterate all of it, but the history that she gave us, the current situation, and the outlook for the future, and maybe just schedule a conversation. It's worth also emphasizing, in case anybody hasn't picked up on this, that we will stop accepting pre-UDO conventional districts on March 1st, 2023, and we will stop accepting pre-UDO conditional districts on February 1st. So we have in February and March cutoff dates, after which all petitions have got to be in the new language. And that is also pertinent to our discussion about, well, what do I use, And what if it only has 3 of those criteria or 2, Is that a reason to turn it down? So I think we can do work to get clarity about that. We did also, I think, the chair, actually in that committee, I'm the chair and you're the vice chair, right? We talked about whether the resources available in our planning and zoning department are sufficient. We have a 6-month queue right now. And Mr. Manager, I talked to you about whether we needed to staff more or what we had to do. Ms. Craig said today she didn't think it was mainly a staffing issue, but I'm still concerned that as we go through the transition to the UDO, that we're going to find that we're placing a huge burden on the staff. And I'm not sure that these wait times can get shorter. Ms. Craig said she thought there were ways that they could get shorter, but I really don't think it's a good thing to leave this 6-month delay out there and potentially longer as we navigate through to the full effectiveness of the UDO. We also talked in the committee about CATS. And we were informed at the beginning, we got an update on the union negotiations with the bus drivers. And we're told that by a vote of something like 194-4, the union had rejected the latest proposal. So personally, I think that's pretty serious. We talked about it at some length. And what are the sticking points? What's the way forward? How do we get out of this? And right now, we're kind of stuck in that one. And I think given the media focus on the buses and the drivers, that's something that this council needs to watch very closely. The other things that we got during the CATS presentation were also kind of a high-level overview of the transportation center, electric buses, the use of these Uber-type services or some kind of smaller vehicle connections so that we had that last mile covered and could provide more access to public transportation. There was a lot in there. I think the topics that we covered will come up one by one at different times in front of council. So this was really just an alert as to the activity at CATS and not a suggestion of any action by us. And then we got a very brief, because time was running short, overview of the UDO implementation process, which is really the way the staff is working during this period until the effective date to be ready for the effective date and how things will work at that point. So those were our main topics and issues.
Thank you. My question is for Mr. Jones. When the UDO, there was a lot of planning and the 2040 plan, was there a transition plan developed for a period like this between the UDO passage and the implementation? Wasn't there some type of transition plan? And
Yes, so, Councilmember Johnson, I think what you are alluding to is during the budget development process, the question about staffing came up, and Ms. Craig, I guess, gave us two opportunities. One was actually staffing. The other one, which is a little bit more difficult to discuss, is your own process. So I had a conversation with Liz today after the meeting, and not for October, but maybe as early as November, there'll be some recommendations coming back to council related to just your own process that could help with this backlog and some more efficiency. But you did approve positions, and we are actively trying to put people in seats if we haven't already started.
Okay, thank you. And then another question I asked was about outreach to residents, not just for the UDO, but for everything that we do. Outreach in capturing residents' email addresses. We receive thousands of emails from engaged citizens. Is there a way that we can capture those email addresses? Maybe we can send you our district contacts or something so that we are engaging more residents. And I think that the 2040 plan was a great example. Out of a million people, we had like 1% or something like that. I don't remember, but we have social media, and we have different email groups like neighborhood leaders and HOAs. But if there was a comprehensive contact list where we're sending residents or some type of, I don't know, an app, when there's city emergencies, when there are different things, we get a lot of information. If we're pushing that out to the residents, I think that would be great in communicating to the public.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. I'll have staff do a little research. There are a lot of programs out there now that sometimes they say not the same 10 people, right, that can really monitor is maybe too strong a word, but see what's the sentiment that's going out in social media. So it's not very costly. I'll check on that. But also, we put, I think, $100,000 into housing and neighborhood services this year. Specifically, I think it was Ms. Watlington's budget amendment, specifically to look at community engagement and how we are connecting with our community. So I'll talk with Renee and also with Sean to see what are some ways to capture the data that you're asking, and is there even more effective way to communicate and get information to our citizens, residents?
Yeah, because Jason, our communication director, responded, and he said that we don't have a comprehensive email list. So even if residents signed up on a website to get information from the city, but the CTC, those pop-up groups, I mean, how many residents know about that right now, and just different things. So I just think if we were capturing data or capturing email and contact lists, we could push this information out on all of our initiatives.
I don't disagree. Yeah.
Thanks.
All right, Ms. Watlington?
I just want to make sure I understood, Councilmember Jiggs, you talked about this ongoing conversation where we're having every month with our zoning meetings, how we're going to look holistically at infrastructure and different items like that. Did anybody, or where do we stand with that piece? Did y'all come to any conclusion in regards to how that work was going to be moved forward, or if at all? Bakari, tap Drakes.
Mr. Driggs?
I'm sorry. I was trying to put together the pieces of the other part of the
It's been a long tactical day, sorry.
Yeah, sure. That's hilarious. I was asking if there was a path forward or an action item around that conversation we talk about every month. We have that same ongoing conversation that there's a need to take this step back and have a holistic look. I didn't quite catch if you mentioned what the path forward was for that, or has that been taken up?
The zoning question, you mean, the debates? So my suggestion was the strategy session I
No,
just offered.
she's actually talking about the idea of when we see the lack of infrastructure, for example, the one at Coltsgate where, we
Oh.
said, so I think, Ms. Watlington, I'm not putting words into your mouth, but these are the things that, if we know that we're talking about pedestrian safety and we don't have any sidewalks.
So I can take that, because I've got a pilot I'm running right now. So the Colwick rezoning, which was the first of us all, and it's coming, if you haven't had yours yet, district reps. Trust me, it's a coming. So I'm running a pilot. I'm working with some staff and CDOT and land use and planning and things like that. And I'm bringing the community together almost in a little pilot where we sit down, we come armed with staff understanding essentially of, okay, this is where we are in investing in infrastructure in this area. This is where the macro trips per day and the macro development picture comes in. And then specifically, this is where, if it's, in this example, office going to ultimately neighborhood 2 with a lot more density, in today in transit terms, we use something called the volume to capacity ratio in our major intersections. And we can tell where we have failing grades with, as of 3 years ago, 25% of the community was in failing grades based on our infrastructure and what we've spent there and what the congestion looks like. This pilot, I'm hoping to sit down and look at the overlay of where the ultimate UDO is going to remap this area, and then work with the community to kind of get a hybrid sense of what could ultimately inform their small area plan, paired with how far behind we are in the infrastructure investment, sidewalks and technology and the lights and everything around there, plus more. So I can come up with like what I think is a rating to say, this is how far behind we are, where this needs to be now, let alone when it transitions to N2. And hopefully, as we do that one exercise with this neighborhood, it can become a blueprint that can be overlaid over the whole city, be a part of the broader small area planning and things that have to happen, but it will give us a really important piece of data, which is in a heat map across the city. Where are these areas where we're not compliant or up to snuff in investing in infrastructure today, let alone when it plops over to potentially higher density?
So you just said something that brings me back, Mr. Manager, to a conversation that you and I had in regards to Still Creek and the need for specific projects that the CIP would support. I know you don't have the answer right now, but I know that CDOT was conducting a very similar analysis that Mr. Bakari just described. I'd like to see the update of that for Still Creek, because what he's describing is what we were talking about how do we go to the public and be able to say, we'd like for you to support these CIP dollars, and this is specifically what your area is getting out of it. We know the high congestion intersection, or the high congestion intersections. We know we've got particular funds for mitigation. What specifically can you expect to get out of CIP for your area? Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. So Assistant City Manager Liz Babson is probably wishing that she was still the director of CDOT after I say this. So if we start to think about the strategic mobility plan, that's awesome, right? Not another acronym that finances, the plan, but just the strategic mobility plan. And Councilmember Driggs and I have had the same conversation that we've had. What's missing is the specific projects that are related to that strategic mobility plan. And our staff, the team led by Liz and Debbie, are working on identifying those projects, because you then can go to the community and say, for X, you're able to receive this. And so it's not a light lift, but I think by the end of the year, Liz, is that right? Awesome. That we will be able to give you, not just in Steel Creek, but across the entire community when we start to think about, and I'll pull out greenways, because it's more of a county thing, but, sidewalks, anything we're doing with traffic mitigation, roads, streets, things of that nature. So, yes.
So it sounds like there's an opportunity then to layer on this work with the community area plans, because we'll have that information going into the new year?
Yes.
Okay.
So could I comment on
Mr.
that?
Driggs, and then Mayor Pro Tem.
So before, we had traffic studies. They were triggered by 2,500 trips. We had criteria like the percentage increase that we used to evaluate proposals, which were often ignored. I had proposed a congestion overlay. I've been proposing something like that for a long time because you and I and others have problems on some of these very dense, already overcrowded corridors with developers pushing for higher density. So if you look at the strategic mobility plan, it has in it a modified version of that traffic study thing. In my mind, that does not adequately address the question of the infrastructure. It goes to a multimodal approach to analyzing, but I'm not seeing the constraints that would prevent the kind of problems that we're talking about.
So I would just mention that I think if you look at it again and you ask yourself, what limits does that place? Like, the way the rule is written right now, it doesn't. So I have a concern too. I've got a petition in my district that wants to put 1,100 units on 50 acres, and it's a shocker. And I'm not sure exactly what I can put up against it in the context of our current conversation. There's got to be some sort of objective reference. But in fairness to petitioners, we can't just decide on a case-to-case basis, I don't like that one, or whatever. So the question is, what criteria can we introduce that they can count on as to what they can do?
I think that this is probably one of the most important discussions this council is going to have. The budget process includes principles for decision-making that we've all agreed upon for many years that are no longer adequate to look at the amount of growth and density that we have. And so, this year will be the year that we will come in with the revised numbers on taxes with the revaluation coming up. So when you start thinking about this, our infrastructure dollars have been growing, but not at the level and rate of this community's need for infrastructure. So in 2 months, we're going to have the equity infrastructure discussion. Imagine that when you felt like you were left behind and you're going to get up to speed. And then you're going to have a discussion around what do we do about density. And these problems are not solved without money. And at some point, we just have to really decide, well, what level are we willing to live with? And how, if we are going to have funding for things that really make this city work, what are the new principles and guidance, what guidance are we going to give in the budget process to get there? Now, I don't know that that's something that's easy. I know it's not easy to do, but we're either going to have to figure out how to divide up the pie as it sits today, or we're going to have to grow the pie so that people can feel like there's an opportunity to get something done as we are changing and growing. So it's a tough debate. I think that the first one is we will have the resilient city discussion, and that resilient city discussion ought to make all of us start thinking about how are we going to actually do something about infrastructure for the communities that we've got, as well as those that we did not serve in the past, and those that are growing like all the Dickens in the future right now.
Madam Mayor, I would add one more option on there's that question too, because I know my colleagues down the line were being a little bit funny, but it brings up the question of tax increases and what we as a community are willing to pay for, and being just very honest about, look, what's in the pot and what will it support, and making sure that our development matches that.
That's very, that's exactly the whole synthesis. You've just sensitized. Thank you, that word. And that's what we're trying to figure out. And I don't know that we have much time left to do it after this year. I saw Ms. Johnson's hand, and then I think we're getting ready to close this out. Mr.
Yeah, I
Wood?
was just going to ask if we could get a presentation from Stormwater, the impact of all the growth on the stormwater from a engineering or a technical perspective. We know that a lot of the neighborhoods are overwhelmed, and they're flooding. Is that truly an impact due to the growth? And I'd really like to hear how this growth is impacting stormwater. So that as we are developing our priorities, we need to know what truly is a priority and where we need to focus or spend money first.
I think, Ms. Johnson, you've made that point, and it was a referral not just for stormwater, but for the capacity of Charlotte Water, and that was sent to the Committee on Budget and Services, I believe.
Right, but as we're developing these policies and looking at the future budget, we need to know how big of a problem this is.
Right.
Thanks.
So, let's start with Ms. Mayfield, and then Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On the lines of my colleague, Ms. Johnson, what will be helpful for me is also, we have had areas that have been undeveloped, and those areas were designated as floodplain areas for decades. We know that we're seeing tremendous growth in the city. It will be helpful to look at an overlay of recent either permits or by right development where there has been tree cutting, whether clear cut or partial, in order to create new development. Specifically because I know there was one lot of land that had been designated as a floodplain area for decades in the city. That particular lot has recently been cleared. The owner, which is a LLC company, is looking to put potentially a single family or duplex on that lot. That clearing of trees triggered the question of if this is happening in any other area of the city. As we are looking at tremendous growth and we're looking at challenges, bless you, we're looking at areas that were once identified as floodplain areas not to be developed, that within recent year, 6 months, year and a half, have been designated to no longer be in the floodplain, and I'm wondering what the potential impact of that could be. So that will be helpful. And they did not pull a permit, because I did reach out to code enforcement, and Ms. Talon did mention that they did not need a permit because it's in a residential neighborhood, so they were able to just clear cut the trees and move forward. My challenge is if this is happening here and it's a neighborhood that has seen some transition, was predominantly a working class, working poor community, but has seen a lot of new growth and development. I just want to make sure that we don't have this happening in other areas, and the impact of 3 to 5, 10 years from now, councils being called about the negative impact.
Thank you, Councilmember Mayfield. I just want to make sure that you and Ms. Askew get together, because we're having a response for you from last Monday's dealing with stormwater, and I don't want to have that response and you think it's not addressing tonight. So let's make sure that we capture all of that, okay?
Right, and thank you, Mr. Manager. That is for full transparency. I had already reached out to Assistant City Manager Askew, as well as the manager on 1510 Noel Place, to try to find out. But as we're having this discussion, I want us to have full transparency that it just may be happening in your area as well, for the district reps, as well as for the other at-large members when we're driving around, especially those of us who have lived in the city for over a decade, or for the handful of natives that's sitting around the table, to keep in mind that this may be happening in your backyard as well.
All right, so we're going to have the Mayor Pro Tem summarize.
I have one more
I'm
item
sorry,
I just
yes.
wanted to mention. I asked the manager right before this session to think about something, but I think it's important just to say it out to everyone. I do think us all meeting in committees in one day was an important step in the right direction, and this being a place to kind of strategize on all that. I think that I think it requires some more structure and some more design in order for it not to become a real challenge. And again, I think a lot of our conversation was far too tactical in nature today, all important topics, but I asked the manager to go back and if he gets time to ask staff for all the takeaways they got and bucket it into strategic or tactical, because just from what I saw, there was a heavy lift of items that now for the next month is going to prioritize staff's time. So I think the biggest thing we can do is, rather than go and have, 4 committees where they then churn out a whole bunch of different takeaways and are their own little mini mayor entities, that we go back to pointing the whole effort in each day of the beginning of the month at something that crosses across all of these verticals. The examples today that we just saw were, when pre-structured by staff, us going in there, understanding the touch points and working out an angle of the problem, we could have done that for arts today in the conversation we had, and come here and had a much more robust conversation, or transit funding, or a geography of town. There could have been so many ways, but if we fail to structure this effort, it's just going to ultimately become a huge, huge influx of additional work outside of the current critical path that staff is on. And I think that's going to be problematic if we don't rein that in. So I just really believe it might evolve to something that can do 20 things at one time in several quarters from now. But right now, as we approach a new operating rhythm together, honing it in so we're all hitting a big, important topic, that we get into this room and aren't just giving recaps, but we're having debate amongst the work that was done during the day, is helpful.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Mr. Bakari, I think you bring up a good point. One thing I want council members to kind of think about in that same light, we were having a discussion, I think it was about arts, and a couple council members started to mention, hey, well, I've already talked to a consultant about this, or another council member said, I've already talked to staff about this. That's good, but I think the intent for these Mondays is when we are really talking to each other, the 11 and 12 of us, and utilizing, because what council members have been saying is that the committee time is really our opportunity to work as deep or as shallow as we as council members feel is the need, to utilize staff and to figure out how to utilize our community partners to make the most time where we're working together as a team. So it's good that we're having those conversations outside of this during the week, during the month. But I think to Mr. Bakari's point is, how do we make sure that we're utilizing this time to talk to each other, to synthesize those conversations that we're having throughout the month.
To that very point, half of every meeting I dropped in on today was staff presentations.
But also to your point, something we will start to kind of take some takeaways from here. So I'll get with staff and kind of cross our I's and dot our T's from some of those takeaways to say, hey, what is this work that's already in this pipeline? How do we need to address these individual council members once? How do they cross over? So that we can also come back as committee chairs who are going to be talking to their committee members. How do we start to kind of get a month-to-month workflow that is more responsive and more efficient? I think that really is the intent, and to listen to us to figure out what we need to better structure these first Mondays to make best use out of them, and really fit them in, again, to our month-to-month workflow.
All right, Mr. Graham?
Yeah, just a comment. Today was almost like the first day of school, right? And so there was a lot of level setting at all these committee meetings. And I only attended two, the one that I chaired in the Transportation Committee. And so I thought it went pretty well. I think it's level setting, making sure that we all start from the same point of information, bringing others who are new up to speed, outlining where we're going and how we're going to get there, and asking and answering tough some questions. So, my perspective may be a little different from my colleague, but I thought it was thought it went pretty well.
I did have.
I think Ms. Watlington wanted, and then we'll come back to you to wrap it up for us.
Thanks. I was just going to say, I think there are two different discussions. Today, I would agree that I thought it went pretty well for it to be the first day, but to me, this was more about process. We've been having committee meetings, right? I think to get at what Councilmember Bakari was talking about is a whole nother level of discussion that feeds into committee meetings. I think unless we do that, our committee meetings are not going to deliver this holistic view. If we were all marching to the beat of the same drum in terms of this is our master plan, or these are our boulders? Boulders? Okay. These are the boulders, and this is how we're going to split it up over the quarters of the next year so that we know what we're talking about in committee by and large over the next year. Without that broader discussion, I don't think we'll ever get to that point in committee where everything is working together.
I agree with you. I think that that is a real question, but I think one of the more difficult questions is, what do you currently have that is driving some of the things that need to be done? Because we've always talked about economic development, and we always talk about it in the context of projects. Well, projects come every day. But a long-term talent workforce plan around how do we deal with people in our neighborhoods so that they get employment, where we know where are the access, these are things that are really important. They're in committee. So the question is, how does the committee begin to frame this? And so I agree, today was a good day. We are getting to know each other. We're going to begin to work together. But at some point, you have to cross that line to what are we really trying to accomplish? And I think all of us, especially so many of us with degrees in project management and all kinds of other skills here, we have a lot of talent in this room. And so I think just among the people that really understand what it is to have a strategic discussion and to move something forward at the same time, I mean, why not? And so let's try to get to that point. So do you want to be a rock, a boulder, or whatever today, Ms. Anderson? No, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, yes.
Mr. Jones, there was one thing that did come up in the TAP committee meeting. What we learned, I labeled it here mayhem, that city council could still be approving pre-UDO rezonings on March 1st, 2024. And that has lead to some confusion in terms of how we kind of deliberate over. So Ms. Anderson used the word a rubric. And I'm wondering if that's something that staff can just do, because it's pretty objective, right? So we're talking about, for us, understanding what was mentioned, the 6-month pipeline, for us to just objectively know what zoning districts we're working with and what place on the quadrant, because it's seems like 4 different maps, and depending on when they put their application in and what they decided to put in their application, we should be looking at many different combinations of kind of policy guidelines. So can the planning staff do that without any further kind of subjective conversation?
Absolutely. I had the same question. So Liz and Allison are already working on that. Yes.
Okay. All right. So I have a motion to adjourn, and thank you, everyone, unanimously. Is there one? I'm sorry. Was there anybody else that wanted to say anything? You looked at me like somebody wanted to say something. I'm sorry. Would anyone else like to say anything? All right. This meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everyone.